Yeah. So we were like, I think it was 3 minutes, 55 seconds in, and she hadn't even started modeling yet. And I think I put that on my plus side because she framed the unit. She said where they were in the unit. She framed the day as like what they were doing that day, and she talked about why it was important before she even got started. And then to like entice them as like, I'm going to model this. She said like, you're going to do this. She explains what it is, and then she explains what they should be doing. So she did this is where we are, this is where we're going, this is why it's important. Here's what we're doing, here's what I'm doing, here's what you're doing. Ready? Go. I mean, and it didn't take her that long, and yeah, she was talking for, I mean, almost 4 minutes, but from then on, she was done.
What she was saying was more engaging and felt more important than the other video.
Yeah, I think so too. Definitely. Pluses for her. On our plus deltas.
I just really like that activity. I mean, from just a content standpoint, that seems like a really good way to teach reading strategies.
Yeah, it was a a brain thing for me. We have reading strategies in our pacing guide, and I'm like, I have no idea how I'm supposed to do all of those at once, and that makes a lot of sense. You know, strategies for reading, strategies for writing, strategies for discussion. I mean,
wait, her delta was because she was too long-winded, right?
I mean, you could say that, yeah. There's a way to shorten that. But I like the frame of reference. I mean, not knowing her classroom, not knowing the year, not knowing the state, not knowing the students at all. Like, I liked knowing where she was and what she was doing. But I can see how for some of her students who've heard that every day might be like, okay, we get it. Other pluses. I kind of ran through my list, so sorry. Deltas, besides being long-winded.
Oh, one of my pluses. I was reading through my list.
Okay.
I like how she held students accountable.
Mm-hmm.
You know, by having them write things down.
And I liked how, yeah, definitely. And I liked how she gave 2 options. You can write the words I'm saying for some of those lower level learners, or you can write what I'm doing. Like she's connecting her thoughts to like her life.
So that's good differentiation.
I think that was, and I'm not sure if that was intentional or if that was just something that she just threw in there, but that looked really clear. One thing I didn't like was how she said, I'm not really familiar with this passage. I wouldn't have said that in front of my class, even if it's true sometimes that I'm not familiar with the passage. I wouldn't have framed it that way, I don't think. Because no matter how many times we read something, we still process internally. So, yeah.
She also didn't use any checks for understanding before she started.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
She could have.
Especially with everything that she gave.
Somebody to repeat back what they were supposed to be doing while she was reading.
Absolutely. Other thoughts? Okay, so both of those teachers were teaching us how to do a think aloud. They were demonstrating how to think aloud. I don't know, have you done this? I've never done a think aloud in my classroom.
I haven't. I want to, but I guess I just haven't come across. With Shakespeare, I definitely should.
Yeah, actually, my student asked for one today. She said, next scene we're going to have to decode ourselves, right? And I said, absolutely. She's like, can you show us like what goes through your mind when you read Shakespeare so that we can do that? And I'm like, oh my gosh, my brain just exploded because that's what I'm talking about tonight. And so, yeah, and it's also, when you're not sure how to teach it, it's a good way to show students how you think about it, because some of them learn just even from that instead of a formula or a process or even like a definition.
Or even I do, you do, we do.
Yeah, it's just a different way.
Well, I've gotten close to doing something like this, but I've just called it like the I do part of I do, we do, you do.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, that's what she's doing is the I do.
She is, yeah.
And then,
So you could definitely combine these into, for your I do as a think aloud, and maybe a we do instead of you verbalizing what you think, maybe you read a section and say, okay, what are you thinking? Mm-hmm. Sharing out that, and then, which I think elementary school teachers do a lot, they read a big book and they're like, okay, what do you think is happening? And then the you do is definitely, you can do partner work think aloud. So there's just kind of exploded in my mind a little bit where you do a think aloud and the I do, and then we do a we do together, and then 2 partners sit side by side and they think aloud. And they do this a lot in math class where they explain their process, but we don't really think about that in English. I actually think it would be a good way to boost their writing because they're having to verbalize what's going on in their head. If they can say it, then they can write it.
Yeah.
So I think that would help that as well, which kind of blew my mind when I was thinking about it the other day. Yeah, and I think this is the student-centered modeling that is on our sheet here that's talking about, I did it, now you model for each other what goes through your head, and it's really good for things like inferences, predictions, connecting with context, things like that are hard to explain and hard to teach, if that makes sense. Yeah. Last thoughts about the videos before we move to formative assessments. We don't have a lot of time for formative assessments, but that's okay. Yeah, so some of the feedback I got from the MTLDs, both Steph and Jamie emailed and said, hey, would you mind throwing in how to assess and when to assess in a learning team time? So tonight and at our 4C Saturday, we're talking about assessments and how important they are and when to use them, things like that. So I have a copy of an email that I sent one of our core members about paperwork. And he said, I have a lot of paperwork, I'm really looking to cut down. So I was typing a lot of information. And the things, and at the bottom I said, if this seems really unreasonable or you want to push back, or if this isn't something you don't understand, maybe the stress isn't the paperwork, but you're not assessing the right things or you're not sure how to assess appropriately. So we talked a little bit about formative assessments in the I do, you do, we do, but I want to talk about when we formatively assess and what that looks like in our classrooms. Yeah.
Okay.
Thoughts?
How, or just
like how, when, why? What do you think? Is it a struggle?
Formal assessments?
Formative.
I think it's a struggle, and I think it's got to be separate. I'm learning, and I'm not good at it.
New.
But learning, like, to separate a formative assessment and when I'm being proactive or intentional about sort of getting like intel back from students about how well they understand what we're doing, and that being different from like collecting classwork for participation.
Absolutely.
So if we did a worksheet today in class and they all turned it in, that's one thing. But like looking at that and seeing like how many of them got answers right on that worksheet is different than like a more sort of intentional formative assessment where I guess it's not even so much their completion that's important, but it's actually like how well they're thinking and understanding, and there's different ways to measure that, and they're just kind of separate categories in a way.
Absolutely, and I still struggle with this too. I think a lot of teachers do, where we're thinking about what are my kids doing? Okay, they did this, do I need to take it up? Is it a formative assessment? How accurate is it right now? And I think we fall into the trap a lot of, we are continuously formatively assessing. Like when you walk into your classroom and you give directions and you see the nodding, you recognizing that a student understands your directions is a formative assessment. I mean, listening to a student talk about a story is a formative assessment. But how much of that should we be collecting, grading, putting in grade books, things like that? That's where it kind of blurs a little bit. And I know our school's a little different because we have standards-based grading, and not everybody else has standards-based grading. So ours is even blurrier because do you put a formative assessment as a standards grade? Is that a classwork grade? Like what do you do there?
I think that when it comes to formative assessment, I guess with English it's a lot easier for me than my other prep because the other prep is a remedial class. So some things for English that I have done as far as with formative assessments, aside from like the head nodding, like I try to gauge with the class discussion, and that can be very difficult in a class of like 28 or 26, whatever my other English class has, but like some of the things that I do to try to hold students accountable, which can be like a plus and a minus at the same time, is like partner work with certain things. So like, okay, what I did for the last lesson yesterday, we read one of the excerpts from one of the plays that we're reading, and I assigned the groups that they were in, and I told them, okay, so you guys, it was in like middle English, so it was a little bit different language. So it could be something that was difficult to understand. So I'm like, you guys are going to talk within your groups about what just happened, and then you're going to write a summary of what just happened, like a 3 to 5 sentence summary of what's going on. Because I need to know if we need to have a lesson on translating in Middle English versus if you guys actually understand. And so, like, to reiterate how much I wanted them to understand, they had an intro ticket today to see, like, who was lost and who wasn't lost, but they couldn't use their text and they couldn't use their notes. And it wasn't necessarily something that was like a quiz or an exit ticket, but it was like, how much of yesterday did we get? Like, how much going into this unit, like, how much time do we need to spend on an excerpt? How much discussion do we need to spend on an excerpt of what is actually going on versus actually having, like, analyzing questions. So that actually worked because I had students admit that they didn't remember, and they asked to reread it. So that went a lot better than I thought it would go, and, like, I was able to, like, I was actually able to get a lot of different feedback from my students because I cold call a lot of my class. So I intentionally cold call, like, the students who don't speak up and those who, like, I saw, okay, they had 2 or 3 sentences. And I, just informally going around and saying, like, okay, it doesn't look like you have quite a bit there, or it looks like you're struggling to answer these questions. And they were just simple questions like, why did he call the doctor? Or just, like, plot type of questions. And so that helped me. But typically because I do a lot of partner and group work in my class, the way I formally assess is just to, like, go around for the participation assignments and see, like, how much are you guys understanding.
Absolutely. Which
can be very, like, it can be very tiring to do that. But in my remedial class, it's needed for some people. And then in my English class, I don't do that as much because I'm able to, like, trust that they will do it because it just builds up on, like, some major assignment that we'll end up having.
Right.
Still tough, though.
A lot of my classes build like that, where I'm like going around and checking, and then I fall prey or I fall victim sometimes to a couple of kids in the group. The group is doing well, and a couple of kids are lost. And then when I do the individual practice, the independent assignment, they're a little more lost. Mm-hmm. So I have some tips for formative assessments, but they're just very basic. There's a lot of different types, even circulating the room. I do quizzes that I count as classwork under standards based, but I call them quizzes because they're independent, it's silent, they're treating it like a test. And they think of it as a test, but it just goes under their homework grade, or I'm sorry, their classwork grade, so that I can really check their individual understanding. And then checking homework and classwork for accuracy, not the completion like you were talking about. Like if I collect to their notes, I make sure they've done it. I don't grade it for content. If I grade something for content, that I consider like a serious formative assessment. And I usually call those quizzes just in my class. So I have a lesson plan. I have 2 that we can look at. And what I want to do is look and see where the formative assessments should be and are, and if they're in the right places. So,